Hi everyone, I hope you're doing great and welcome back to my channel. So this is the third episode of our Webflow optimization course, and if you're brand new here, I highly encourage you to go out there on my channel and view the first and the second episode. Now, we recently covered how to optimize a font, right? We uploaded that font to our new Webflow project, and on the second episode we've been covered creating a basic design system. So we have that. So we have those guidelines and those basic classes that we're gonna reuse throughout our Webflow project. Now in today's episode, right? In today's episode, we're gonna talk about the HTML structure. We're gonna build the navigation, and we're gonna build the header section of our Adobe XD design. So before going into the design and showing exactly what we're gonna do, let's roll the credits. Okie dokie. So just a small refresh for all of you out there. This is our design, and in today's episode we're gonna build our navigation on the top, and we're gonna build our full width background image section, which is basically the header. Good. Now before we get started and build these sections on Webflow, just wanted to take a couple of moments and tell you guys that today we'll basically cover some core HTML tags. Now you probably know that Webflow, it's not just a website builder, it's also an HTML and CSS visual editor. So it's important when you build your Webflow site and when you optimize it, you have this mindset that, hey, I'm developing a real HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code inside my Webflow project. So being said, today we're gonna cover HTML tags. And for some of you, this might sound familiar. So we have different HTML tags like A, which is usually used for links, for text links, for link blocks, and we're also gonna cover the nav tag, the header tag, and later in the course we're gonna talk way more of these tags. We're gonna implement them because, so why it's important to use these tags is because browsers and search engines, they love when you have a good structure of your web page. It's like reading a book. You have the page where you have the table of contents, and then from there you have the book breaks down by chapters, and each chapters might have sub chapters, might have the body text itself, might have some images. So of course that would be a greater reading experience if your book would have all of these components. Same goes, for example, for a YouTube video. Now if a YouTube video have chapters, have different annotations, that have different transitions and tooltips on the video itself, this is gonna be so much easier for you and so much enjoying to watch that YouTube video. And we have for so long time CSS version 3 and HTML version 5 that gives us additional HTML tags that we definitely need to use so our browser understand how our web page is structured, and as well as any Google bots that go out there on our website and scrape our information. So with that being said, let's start diving into our navigation. So I'm gonna open up my Webflow project, and I'm gonna select the body tag. So Command A, which will open up my quick find, and I'm gonna type div block. Everything we build inside the Webflow, it's a div block. Okay, so a div block, it's basically a box. Everything in web, it's a box. Okay, so with our div block selected, I'm gonna go to my element settings, or I can simply press the D key. So element settings, and right here we have tag. Now I wanna make sure that I use a proper tag for this div block. Now I'm gonna click on this drop down menu and I'm gonna choose nav. What this means is, instead of the div tag applied to my HTML element, to my div block, so it won't be anymore div class equal, right? It's gonna be nav class equal. Okay, so it's important to note these HTML tags and why they're important. Now I'm gonna click in a moment nav, but just wanted to give you a quick glance on what exactly is nav. So as you can see, Webflow tells that, hey, nav defines a set of navigation links such as those in your main site navigation. So basically, by applying this tag, our browser and different accessibility features inside our browser, they know that this is our navigation. This is where all of our links will all of our links will live, and then later on, when Google go out there and scrape our website for the site links, he'll know exactly where our navigation links are located. I have a really good article from html.com which explained the basic tags and why we would ever need to use these tags. I'm gonna make sure that I have this article in the video description, so if you guys have time, go out there and fully read this article to better understand what are obviously HTML5 tags and why we would ever need to use them. Good. Back to our Webflow. So we have our div block, which now it's a nav block, and I'm gonna click my navigation, my new navigation, and hit Control Enter or Command Enter, Command Return to add a class to my nav block. So I'm gonna say Navbar. Now remember that it's also important to name your classes in a mnemonic way. Now a mnemonic practice in a mnemonic principle in naming your class means that you name your class so it's clear what this class do or what's the function of this class. So for example, I know that this class is called Navbar, which stands for navigation bar. So this is a mnemonic way of naming your classes, and you should apply this throughout your entire site, because later on it's gonna be so much easier for you to understand what this class do and to what element it is assigned. And what will happen if I'm going to change that? So Navbar, we have this new class right here. Yeah. And now inside, if you do remember from our previous episode, we've built a div block, which is a container. So I'm going to choose container from my selector pane right here. And if you do remember, we limited it to 1200 and we set the margin to auto, just simply because now most of the websites out there, they do have a container, and they need to have a container because if anyone out there browsing my website on a 4K display, I want to make sure it's easy to read and basically digest my website sections, information, content. So it's important to have a container for your website. Good. Now I also know that, let me go back to my design. I know that my navigation have some padding here. So I'm having 18 pixel padding from the top and from the bottom. And with my navbar selected, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna hold the Alt key. This will allow me to add the same padding from the top and from the bottom. And same goes if I hold Alt from the left and from the right. And as you can see, Webflow kind of highlight me both directions, but let's actually add padding from the top and from the bottom. So we talked about 18, that's the power of 2. Okie dokie, so 18, good. And what I also need is, well, because my container it's 1200, but my minimal desktop size is 900, so guys, it's 992. As you can see, my container, my navigation, it's on the limit. So let's add 20 pixel padding for my nav bar from the left and 20 from the right. Good. Now right now my container, my navigation container will not be wider than 1200, but also have this padding so it's clean and it's not going off limit. Good. So now inside my container, I need to understand visually how my navigation container it's being structured. So I'm having my link block right here, which have this logo we previously built in our basic design system. And then on the right, as you can see, I'm having a group in my Adobe XD, and this group have this text, this call to action text, and it has these two buttons. So what we're gonna do is, before we would ever translate these elements inside a Webflow, you need to group them just like you would group them inside the Webflow. So with this in mind, let me just go to my design system, and I'm gonna copy my brand link right here. I'm gonna go back to the home and paste it right here. Don't worry that it takes full width, because in a moment my container will have a display set to flex. And now what else I want to have here inside this container, I want to have a div block. So let's add a class. It's going to be Navbar CTA-W, which stands for wrapper, where you can use -C, which stands for container. Now I'm with wrappers, so it's going to be wrapper. Good. Enter to apply the class. And now inside this div block, which in essence it's a group, I'm going to have my text block. And let me copy. So launch your course in the next 2 hours. And I'm going to paste it right here. Now, the reason why we don't have navigation links is as soon as the user will scroll past the header, we're going to display the main navigation. Because we want to drive conversions from this landing page, I want to make sure my call to action and call to value is visible in that very moment a client lands on my site. So what else we have in this group? We have these two buttons, give it a try today and sign in. So let's make sure we add those also. Now, what I'm gonna do is, you can see that these two buttons, they kind of live in their own group right here. So we have group number 6, and then we have these two buttons. So let's do the same thing inside the Webflow. Remember, we're doing this because later on it's gonna be so much easier to manage the elements inside the group. So with my Navbar CTA wrapper selected, I'm going to hit Command A to open up my quick find, and I'm going to drop a div block right here. And my div block will be Navbar CTA BTNs, which stands for buttons. So inside my Navbar CTA buttons, let me actually go to my design system and let me copy this black button. Let me go back to my home and let me paste it right here. Okay, now we also have one more button which have this ghost style applied to it, and if you do remember from our previous episode, we created a combo class for our BTN simple, which is BTN simple ghost. Good. Okay, now you can see that these two buttons, they're not so tall, so their height is 54 pixel, where our buttons right here are 65. So I want to maintain 65 for all my buttons. That's important that you have a consistency, so it's clear for the user that this is a button. On the top of that, we have the Fitts law in user experience. Now, Paul Fitts was an American psychologist, and analyzing the human motor system, he discovered that the time it takes to click on the target on a button, right, or on the link, it's proportional, or it's dependent on the size of this target and the time it takes to arrive there, so the distance. So we want to make sure the button is wide enough, it's big enough, and it's positioned where it's easy to click on that button. Okay, so I have my two buttons right here. Now what I'm gonna do is, of course, I'm gonna change the text. So we have give it a try today. So my first button text will say give it a try today, and please try not to use caps lock because we already have applied text transformation uppercase to our button, and it automatically makes all of our letters uppercase. And the second one is sign in. Good. Now because both of these buttons, they live inside another div block, another group, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna apply display grid. Why so? Because in a moment we're gonna build some padding, some space, some gap between these buttons. With my display grid selected, now what I'm gonna do is I wanna switch off one row from here, yeah, and I'm gonna switch one column from here. Actually, no, wait a second. Yeah, one column, and I'm gonna choose direction column because these are columns. I'm gonna choose done, and in a moment we will get back to our display grid, but let's actually add a class to our tags right here. So that's gonna be Navbar CTA copy, might be, or it might be text. Let's make this even simpler. And I know that I'm having a margin right here. Where is my design? So I'm having a margin right here of 25, but I don't want to apply this margin because you'll see that we'll apply this display grid, which will give us much more control over our gap between all of these elements. But at least what I know is it's not 16 in size, it's 15. So I'm gonna leave this as 15. Good. Let's go back to our container, to our main big container, and let's add a combo class, which will be Navbar -w, which stands for wrapper. Hit enter and set a display to flex. All the elements, I wanted them to be horizontal direction, and for alignment I wanted them to be at the center, and for justify I'm gonna choose justify space between. Now what this does is, because we have two groups right here, two elements inside our container, one element will be pushed to the extreme left and another one will be pushed to the extreme right. And the next thing to do is obviously to play a little bit with our Navbar CTA W with our wrapper. Let's make even simpler and let's go with display flex, and I want our elements to be aligned in the middle. And for the justify, I'm gonna choose justify and, so my elements are all positioned, are all floating to the right. And remember this button is right here. Now what we can do is we can edit our grid right here, and for our second one we can make it smaller. So let's try to make it smaller. Yeah, wonderful. So there's no need to apply a combo class to this button and define a margin from the right, because we have this grid right here, and now we can add wherever margin we want without adding an additional combo class. Good. So we know that the space between these buttons are 11, but remember we have this fits law in accessibility, and I want to make sure both buttons have enough gap so the user does not accidentally click on sign in instead of give it a try. So I'm gonna add the gap between the columns. I'm gonna set it to 16. Good. And then with my Navbar CTA tag selected, I'm gonna add, let's try to make 16 pixels. Set the margin. Good. So it's 16 pixels here and it's 16 pixels here. Make sure there's enough room for every trigger, for every target, every button, so it's easier for the user to digest and it's easier for the eye to view all the information and process it. We're gonna do our full width background image right here. Good. Now let's go back to our body right here, and let me type section and drop a section right here. Now remember, even if this is a section, it's still using the tag div. So from our tag right here, drop down, we're gonna choose header. And as you can see, Webflow tells that, hey, header specifies a header for a document or section. So I'm gonna go with header, and I'm gonna go back to style pane and add my class. So that's gonna be home header. Now probably you thought that, hey, this is gonna be a CSS background, but no, in reality we don't want to use any CSS background. So I'm gonna tell you one more time, do not use CSS backgrounds. Try to use real images, like real IMG tag, because first of all we have the lazy load, secondly we have more control over the optimization of that image. I need to define the width and the height of my header section. So I know that it takes 100% width from my entire design, so I'm gonna say 100%, and the height is 552. So let's paste it here. And now what I love to do is, since we're gonna use laser load, as your website will load up as your browser will access the resources on the Webflow server, we need to make sure we have a background color so the text is visible. So I already have this here, this gray. So I'm gonna copy this gray color. I'm gonna copy the hex. I'm gonna go back to my Webflow, and under the backgrounds where it says color, I'm gonna paste my hex. Wonderful. Now I have this background image, and for those people, for those users that have a really slow internet speed, that's gonna be displayed a gray color, but it's also gonna have the rest of the content, like our heading, subheading, and the button we're gonna add in a moment. Now the last thing I want to do for our home header section, for our home header tag is to go to the position right here and choose relative. So that's why from static we went with relative, so our image and gradient can be a child and be absolute to our home header. Okay, so with this in mind, let me drop an image right here. So image, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to Adobe XD, and I'm gonna show you exactly how you can optimize full width images. So let me select my image. It's right here. I'm gonna copy this image and I'm gonna paste it somewhere outside my artboard. And as you can see, my image takes the full width of my artboard, which is 920. So what I want to do is I wanted to think for a moment. Hey, probably I'm not gonna have traffic from desktop HD, ultra HD monitors and 4K, and on top of that, my full width header section also have this gradient effect on the top, which will smooth my pixelated and optimized image. So what I'm gonna do, guys, is remember, in web, every kilobyte, every byte counts. So instead of 920 for the width of this image, I'm gonna go with 1280 to maintain my aspect ratio. Now the very next thing to do is obviously to export my image. So right click on my image, export selected. So I have my JPEG and my PNG, and as you can see, my PNG is 430 kilobytes and my JPEG is 193. But let's optimize both and see exactly how much we gain in terms of compressing an image and optimizing an image. All the time, well, most of the time, I'm using compressor.io. It's a free tool and it do a really good job at using the lossy or lossless compression. So I'm gonna choose my, let me do a refresh, and let me drag and drop my both images, so my JPEG and my PNG right here. So as you can see, still my JPEG is way better than the PNG, so I'm gonna download my JPEG version. So download, I'm gonna replace it with this right here with JPEG. I'm gonna click save and just simply replace my original exported image. Now let's add this image right here inside the Webflow. So with this in mind, let's click on assets. The hotkey is G, and what I love to do, so let me first delete these folders so I can take you step by step. What I love to do is I love to have a folder for every page on my site. By doing so, it helps you with the productivity and managing your assets. So I'm gonna click new folder and I'm gonna type homepage. And inside this folder, I will have my image assets, documents, Lottie files. So let me drag and drop. So yeah, 27 kilobytes, that's how much we saved. So drag and drop. So let me click on my image, double click, choose image, and choose this image right here. A lot of you, when you run Pingdom, GTmetrix, or Google Lighthouse Audit, you have this problem that, hey, your images width and height are not exact as the original source images you're using. So why this is happening? This is happening because you haven't defined a width and a height for your image HTML tag. What we want to do is we want to define the width and the height, and the width and the height will be the same width and height we have for our source image. So that's going to be 1280 in width by 368 in height. So we want to make sure we tell the browser, hey, please do not rescale these images, use the same width and height as my source image. Now, for the load, you obviously want to go with loads on scroll. This means that your image will only be loaded when it gets inside the viewport, inside the screen. We're gonna cover the alt text in our next episode, but for the moment, I'm gonna go with decorative. Lastly, we need to apply a class. So that's gonna be header img. Hit enter. Maybe do header. Maybe do home header img. And we can apply a really great CSS rule, which is object fit. So before we would ever do object fit, what we need to know is the object fit your image takes the full width and height of the parent in order to use this object fit. So with my image selected, for the width I'm gonna go with 100 pixel, 100%. And for the height, same thing, 100%. And now my image takes 100% from my entire width of my website, and the height is 100% from this 552. So that's why we have defined a fixed width and height for our home header section. Good. Let's select back our image, and under the fit right here, we're gonna change fill to cover. And now you can see it works the same as our CSS background would work, but in this instance it's a real image, it's not a background image. So it will take into the consideration the lazy load and will not have those problems with the width and the height inside our Google Lighthouse audit. Good. Now lastly, what I want to add right here, with my image selected, I'm gonna go to position and change from static to absolute. Remember, that's why we have defined a position relative to our home header, because our image should be absolute to our home header section. And I'm gonna click on full because I want to take the entire space. So with the absolute in mind, what I need to set is the Z index. And now what Z index means, it's like layers in Photoshop. If you want a layer to be on the top of another, you obviously bring that to top. Same thing happens here, because I want my image to be on the very bottom. The Z index will be 0, and then for my fade, for my gradient, the Z index will be 1, so that's gonna be on the top layer of my image. And then we're gonna also add our container with the content, with the heading and the button, which will have a position relative and a Z index set to 2, so it's on the top of both the image and our gradient. Okay, so Z index, hit enter to apply. And now I'm gonna go back to my home header, and I'm gonna drop right here another div block, and that's gonna be home header fade. Now same thing here, it will take 100% of the width and 100% of the height. It's gonna be position absolute, just like our image. It will take the same full space, and now the Z index right here, it's gonna be 1, so it's on the top of our image. Now let me go back and see exactly. So we have this gradient right here. We have the first point, it's 17% in opacity, and the end point it's 54%, and both the color are black. Let me click on the plus to add a gradient right here. Now for the first point right here, I'm gonna click on A, which stands for alpha. I'm gonna type, actually let's go with 18, so 18%. I'm gonna close this, and I'm gonna choose the endpoint, double click, and for the alpha I'm gonna go with 56 actually, and the color will be black. Good. And now you can see that all works great. And by the way, our image, let's make our canvas a little bit bigger, so I would say 920. Oh, 120. And as you can see, our image works exactly as a background image in CSS. It takes cover. Yeah? Where we have applied our object fit right here, I'm gonna choose on these 3 dots, which are basically the same as you would modify a CSS image. And now I'm gonna choose the position right here. So these two people, they're always in the focus. Now finally, what we need to add is obviously our container that have our heading 1, that have heading to, and also have our button. Now remember that in web, every page should have only one heading, one level. That's gonna be your main page title, that's gonna be your main search term, that's gonna be optimized for Google. And now every section inside your web page should have a heading 2, and then you can have as much heading 3 or heading 4 as you want. So if you're using H1, the next level should be H2. Don't use H3. So you have to kind of go down. So from H1 all the way to H2, H3, H4, H5. Never go with H1 and then the next heading inside the section go with H3. Never ever go with H1 and then H2 and then H3. Hope this makes sense. So let me copy my H1 level. Let me go back to my Webflow, and I'm gonna select my home header, and I'm gonna drop a div block right here. Let me add the class, so that's gonna be home header content, and it's gonna be position relative because position static does not have a z index. So I need to switch to relative and set the z index to 2 actually. Yeah. And what I also love to do is I love to keep everything organized. So my home header content is the first item on the top, and then we have the fade and then the image on the bottom. Now this will help you in the long run when you optimize and want to quickly modify some stuff on your Webflow project. Good. Now I'm gonna select my home header section. I'm gonna choose display flex, vertical, and align my home header content. Okay, now my whole home header content will have a heading, so H1, and remember only one heading level per page. That's gonna be your main title and your main search term. And obviously I wanna do what I wanna do right here is I wanna apply a class to override this black color. So that's gonna be home header dash head. The color should be white, and I also love to click on this center just to make sure that if some browser do not support flags, well, at least they are centered. In a moment I'm gonna apply a margin from the top and from the bottom to this heading 2 level. Why? Because remember it's a flex, and I want my middle element right here to push my extreme elements to the proximity to the top and to the bottom. So let's select our heading 2. Let's select our content back in Webflow, and let's drop another heading, but this time it's going to be in H2. Now let's add a class, so that's going to be home header dash subhead. Good. The color will be white, so Rubik normal. The size will be 16, and the height usually it's 1.5, so it's 26. Okay, and now I also need a button. So with my home header content selected, let's drop a button right here. And if you do remember, we have already created the class btn simple, and let's add the text. So start today. And if you do remember, we have been talked about the margins from the top and from the bottom of our subhead, so it pushes both our heading and our button to the proximity of our container. So with my heading 2 selected, I'm gonna go to margins, and I'm gonna do let's say 12. Maybe 12 is too much. I'm gonna go with 8, and from the bottom it's 26, but I don't know, go with 26 because I know this is not a native text. It's a div block in essence, so it does take a little bit of 1 pixel, 2 pixel padding inside by default. So I'm gonna go with 24. Looking good. Okie dokie. Now you can definitely add the hover effect to this button, maybe make this white on hover, but that's not the case of our tutorial. I only need to limit the width of my header content. So let's see. What I usually do is I choose the widest element, and in this case we have the subheading, and the width is 423. So let me copy that. Let me go back to the Webflow, and with my home header content selected, I'm gonna go to the max width value and I'm gonna paste it right here. I'm gonna choose my subheading, and on the alignment I'm gonna center my text. Voila, looks perfect. Finally, don't worry about your button. Remember the fits law. Our buttons should take enough space so it's easy to click on them. Don't make buttons where the user will need to click on the text with their mouse or with their finger. Yeah, especially on the mobile, the fits law is super important. Make sure the button is wide enough, it's big enough, have enough space. So even right here, yeah, even right here, it's easy to click. It will save a couple of milliseconds for the user, but trust me, this a couple of milliseconds means a lot for accessibility and site speed. What I also do, I don't love that my button is black, so let me add a class right here, btn light. I'm gonna switch the color, so the color right here will be black. Oh, it's already black, so we need to override. So let me override by doing this. And then for the background color, I'm gonna go with white. So the border will still be 2, so let me reset, but the color will be white. So being said, today we've successfully covered our navigation and the header. We've been talked about the importance of using the proper HTML tags. We've been discovered how to optimize a full width background image, and we talked about compressing those images, and we talked about accessibility and having, well, control over these resources, over these image assets that are being loaded on our site. So with that being said, I hope this video was super informative for you guys, and yeah, if you have any questions, remember in the video description you're gonna have an FAQ section with the most asked questions, so you'll probably find an answer there. Finally, if you found this video informative, please consider to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell, so next time when we're gonna dive into building our SVG logos right here and building our 3 boxes with the features, you will be notified. Okay, so one more time, thanks for watching this video, thanks for taking the time, and I hope it was super useful for you. Love you all, bye bye.